much easier. Which kind of got us to the second thing that we realized in our research. So the first thing was belief, and then the second part is that we participate with issue-based messaging way more than we'll ever participate with putting the organization in the forefront. So if you ever hear somebody say, well, why do you give to why do you give? What do you give to? They're always going to start out with saying, well, I'm really passionate about water, or I'm passionate about my community, or I'm passionate about these things. Barely do we ever hear, I believe strongly that I'm a donor to XYZ, without it followed with, because I believe in this and the work that they're doing. And most don't identify with institutions that way. They identify with the issue. Again, probably the easiest thing to bring people together. So we want the organization to supply messaging that allows the person to create their own narrative. And we'll show you some images later on that were successful. So this is an organization that met our movement status. Has anybody heard of them? Interesting, right? So you're like, Derrick, I thought you were going to talk about the most popular movements as well. Well, we looked at the movements and didn't define them by necessarily how big they got, although there was some categorical significance in those. We did look at the population of people that it has moved. This organization has been very, very successful, actually all throughout college campuses. Maybe not here, but they've been a very small grassroots organization. They went out of business about 10 years ago and then refashioned their model since then. Liberty in North Korea is about helping North Korean refugees resettle. It's a resettlement organization. And I think the best thing their executive director told us is try selling North Korean refugee resettlement in the United States. It's not the most exciting thing for people to be like, that's exactly my issue. You got to find the right donor. You got to find the right person to get there. So this is the organization's work. When we started to sit down with them, because they met everything except completely there was some size population issues, but we do cover them because one of the things that they started to do in the messaging is that they never raise dollars. They always raise people. They would always say to that, so you believe that North Korean refugees should have this, right? That's why we got to get this person out. All right, will you help us get that person out? Here's your chance. We're like, wow, okay. So even though that costs $6,000. But if we went to them and said, will you give us $6,000, us, $6,000, to help them, it would have been a very different messaging scenario. So you will see up there their dollar amount, but you'll notice fundraise for rescues. This is some of their materials. Do you notice anything else about the way that they have started to talk about themselves in social media and also on their website? Anything in particular that you also see that's quite intriguing? One is that they're very good at images and faces. You should know that in photography and imagery, the person's face will have a 10-time more likelihood that they'll get the public to react than it would be a population. Here's a trick for you, fundraisers and marketers. You can put out a message that says 20,000 people are affected by this, and your gift will help another 2,000 do it. How many of you are ready to give $10 to help 2,000 people? Really tough. The general population actually cannot conceptualize that much. They can, though, talk about one person being affected and latch onto that in general. But they can't necessarily latch onto statistics in that way. It's very difficult with how the public perceives it. So when you see their imagery, they're very, very good at that. Now here's a funny thing. We asked for all of their materials to do the full analysis. What you're going to see on the top there is actually their welcome sequence for if you are going to raise money. And if you're going to raise money, and then if you're successful in meeting a fundraising goal. And then you see the bottom sequence is if you are not successful in reaching your fundraising goal. What do you notice just in general about those? Besides the Hollywood violations that they could probably get in trouble with. They did not get clearance for this. Do you notice anything else? What do you see the first words on the top of every email? Andrew Kwan. Imagine if you opened that and it said, Derrick Feldmann, here's your chance to do something. Personalization is very key. Anything else do you notice? You. The word you is actually used substantially throughout And there's always two options or one option for the person to do. So we took a look at this is the sequence in addition that went to somebody, and by the way, their creative team is very creative. And I'll give you two instances of their creativity. The middle one, that says, behind these red boxes, one of these red boxes is a cute cat picture. If you have time to look for a cute cat picture, you should be going out and helping the people of North Korea. The other one that was received this is probably a fundraiser's dream, and they actually did it, which is, you signed up to raise money, this is the breakup email, but you didn't raise any money. Is this a time to break up? Do you not want to do this anymore? Now, so this is a chance of learning and failure. That actually had a substantial amount of unsubscribes, because why? We treated the individual very poorly. And they said that was a very bad thing that we did. Now, here's what's also interesting. They probably had the best PR move from it. They emailed back and said, we were trying to be cute and funny and it wasn't, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that we both believe in the same thing, that North Korean people need this. So they actually got some of their audience back that had left from that message. And you'll notice that in each one of those, again, there's that personalization. This was their last one. That was 2 years ago, and then we followed them for a full year to see what they would do. This is the new email sequence that was used last fall in November. They have a fundraising time over the course of about 4 weeks. What do you notice about this message? Besides, it's really nicely designed, but besides that, anything in particular?
The call to action of using your internet power.
Using your internet power? Look at the face. That's an actual person that they're focusing on. Notice opportunity. Donors and the public respond to opportunity much more than they do just negativity as well. Now, this was at the bottom of the email. When we got that, we're like, what in the world? We thought somebody had messed up. And so this is what this says. Again, it is, I really like you, Derrick. I'm going to be sad if this is our last time together. This is coming from the Fox, by the way. I want you to continue receiving these quick reminders. Let me know how I can help you. Do you think this message was positively received or negatively received?
Negatively.
But it's a cute fox.
That was the most interesting part of it, right? So we then went around to try and figure out why on earth they would use this. And what do you think people remembered? That. Which went back to another learning that we discovered is the power of symbolism. You have to realize that in movements, now that's a funny, again, they were on the outlier of everything that we had had. Like, that was the symbol of this year's campaign. We're like, would you ever do that? Probably not. They had built up their audience to accept this kind of message. Bear with me. If you were to ever start with that, that is not what we would recommend. But, and that's how their organization operates. That's their choice. But the interesting thing about symbolism, and we saw this with all the other movements that we highlighted, is that most of them made tweaks to the symbol of their logos, to the symbol of what they were doing, to gravitate people to share commonality in it. One of the most successful moves of this was human rights campaigns changing of their blue and yellow logo to a red logo last year when the Supreme Court case was being heard. We also saw that with Autism Speaks, that has had a very, very successful movement in the autism world and awareness building too. So do not forget that actually symbolism unites people. Whether or not they will say it initially, they'll bring it back in together. This is the sequence that they also had as they went forward. And these are all the things every fundraiser got. And this is how much money they raised last year over 4 weeks from that many people. Now, this is why they've done 4 or 5 of these campaigns in general. Now, what made it very successful is that they allowed the individual to create a narrative. One thing I didn't share with you is that on college campuses where they are present, they allow their actual population to mess with the logo completely. They also allow the people that go out and speak to their audiences to build more people into the movement. They allow them to create their own events and activities, and they don't require sanctioning of those activities at all. And they said 99.5% of the time, it's all good. It's the 0.5 that when we hear something. We're always worried about the 0.5, but it tends to be a very small, minute piece in general. So when we think about narratives, this is one too. Does anybody know where this actually started, the first campaign where this was done? Is anybody familiar with this? This happened, that was the only image that was placed on a billboard ad in Toronto. It was actually the first place at one of the major 4 intersections in Toronto. Does anybody know what nonprofit is associated with it? There isn't. There really was not a nonprofit associated with it. It wasn't till 6 years in. By the way, this is 6 years old and you still remember it. It wasn't until 6 years in did Dove start the Dove Fund because they realized this was much bigger than what they were. It symbolized a very unique narrative of women today as well. What's also interesting is you'll notice there was no language to the image. That's all it had. It was the pure image of itself. And imagery was the 4th thing that we discovered. If some of you have seen the Syrian refugee piece and the images that had come up from the beach, we all had a reaction to it. It's funny, as people had actually given money when there's no money opportunity to be had. Nobody asked for money, it just happened. In this case, people started to create their own narrative. And when we sat down with the Dove folks, one of the things that the creative team developed from that they realized is you're onto something when somebody would approach you and say, this is what it means for me. And it tied it back in, and you couldn't, and they said that what they realized in the beginning is that storytelling was so powerful in that. You can look and see some of their videos have been viewed 20 million times. They've now since devoted resources to it. And they said it was never Dove's idea in the beginning to be investing in this topic or category, it's just that this had moved somebody so quickly. After it was successful in Toronto, and by the way, there are stories of people stopping in Toronto, taking images and pictures and tweeting them out and doing all of that. They had to take that part down and put it in other areas of Toronto because it was having a potential negative reaction on the driving public that was there. It was then since went into the United States and then went viral through several other different campaigns. So we noticed that imagery is powerful. The narrative to believe in is very powerful. People want to own things and they want it to be about themselves as much as about the people that they're helping. And we started to see from those learnings, right, what made a very powerful social movement today versus others. So which kind of gave us to how did the social movements evolve, right? At one point we're talking about something else and then all of a sudden it becomes part of our public discussion. And we realized there were primarily 4 phases. In the beginning, most of the social movement leaders were very, very successful at gathering people who believed in the same thing they did. The second thing is that they got them acting so much. How many of you ever signed a petition? For anything, just anything in the world, right? How many would like to share why they, I don't need to know what you did it for, but why? Does anybody want to share why they signed a petition?
I felt like I was doing something.
Yeah.
I was making some difference.
So we have a full research team at Achieve, and so it was funny, we had one day that one of our research associates, who's a very introverted person, and I just love her to death because you need, I'm a very extroverted person compared to her, and she comes in and she says, I think we have a big day on our hands. Oh, all right. So I said, what's the situation? And you should know that throughout the year we run research panels, which means we're following people and their behavior over the course of the year. You're like, do they know you're doing that? Yes, they do. They sign in. Yes, they also forget quickly that we're following them about 2 weeks in and we see their real behavior. So FYI, you would do the same thing. So we're sitting there and it's about 4 months into the panels and she comes in and she says, out of our national sample of random people in the United States that we have that are following, 10% of them took the same petition. Last night, the same exact time, within about a half hour. When you have that happen in a random population of people that just happen to do the same thing, it's actually a pretty big deal, even though it was only like 100 people. It doesn't seem like it, but there's 100 people that didn't know each other. So then I said, what in the world, what was it? You know, this has got to be really good. And it was a petition, and the petition started out by saying, if you sign here, world hunger ends tomorrow. So then she's looking at me, and I'm looking at her thinking, do you honestly think these people believe world hunger ends tomorrow since they signed it? And we're like, no, that's not possible. And of course, through much more conversation, we walk out into the rest of the office, and we're like, do you guys think they think world hunger ends tomorrow? We convinced ourselves that they think world hunger ends tomorrow. So we made the very expensive decision. When you pull somebody out of a panel, you can't use them again. It's unfortunately in research, you're done because we predispose them, like we're asking them questions. So we pull all of them out, all 100, and we sit them down, and of course we open up with, we're curious. By the way, it's researcher speak where we don't believe you. But no, we said, we were wondering why you signed this petition last night. What was it about it, and so forth. And we're thinking, right, they think world hunger or something related to hunger. And they're like, yeah, it was a great piece. I loved doing it, and it felt good. Okay, and they're like, is there any other reason why you signed it? And we're spending time, like real qualitative interview time. And they're like, nope, just looked good and it felt great to sign it. I'm like, oh no. So at the end of it, out of all 100, we realized that act of doing good feels good, right? It felt good for them to be a part of it. Yes, they actually do believe hunger is an issue, but they weren't ready to go rally and stand on the steps of the State House at all. They were just ready to act and be a part of it. And sometimes our actions is what we need to keep doing. We learned that a model called Learn, Act, Give, where you help people understand the issue, you get them acting in the issue, volunteering, petition signing, liking things, and so forth. You get them continually to act, so at a point when they need to give something of their time, skill, or their talent, or money, then they're ready to be more involved in the issue. And that's the case of what happened there. So a lot of the time we'll see in these early campaigns that if you want a population to truly believe, they constantly need to act for the issue. They need to constantly feel as if they're getting closer and closer to getting there with you. And it was funny because we were going back and we were working with a research professor at the University of Virginia. And can you explain to me why somebody would do that? And his best response, he's been thinking about empathy in the brain. You know, the brain operates in a path of least resistance, right? How many of you want to lose weight but don't really want to work at it? It's all, right? Your brain says, I want to lose weight, but I don't want to do actually any workouts for it. And your brain's thinking, how can I help you do something and be satisfied that you're doing it? Or get there the cheapest way, the fastest way, the most economical way. That's the path of least resistance. Well, it's interesting as we noticed, because we were trying to get at why didn't people go the next step? Why didn't they do more than signing the petition? Well, that was the brain saying, here's a way for you to stand up today, just today, in this moment, without actually doing a ton of work, but it felt great as well. That's the brain thinking through empathy and so on. So we realized that a lot of the movement builders in the beginning constantly created things and actions for people to do all the time, from petition signing to go out and getting one more person, because they realized the more activity they did, the more entrenched of the issue it was locally for them. Now here is where we saw a really bad cycle. I say that there were some bad signs. This is where we get a small population of people only doing things with themselves that tends to only be a small little group. And this is a small little nonprofit group that unfortunately doesn't get out of this. And in that case, they tend not to actually grow into a movement where they're bringing other people in, because they haven't been successful about changing the narrative to get opportunity for others to be a part of it. Haven't been successful at telling the story. And when we looked at all the social movement leaders, one thing we realized is all of them were very, very successful storytellers about this is your opportunity to do stuff, and they would get people out of that and train their believers to go out and tell stories with them too. So essentially then there would be this Pinnacle Action. This is the on-the-ground work, and then most of them, if you heard about a social movement or a cause issue in the last 5 years, they usually use something in the media or something that in our discussions that they said, this is the time to go out and make it happen. And that's what they did. And then lastly, almost all the sustaining movement, one of the things you should follow is the environmental defense funds. Does anybody know the environmental defense fund? They have a really strong movement of environmentalism. You know, environmental change is a lot of policy. There's a lot of policy issue in it. But if you follow their work as an email subscriber, it will make it feel like we're just right on the doorsteps of getting something done. And what was interesting is as our research team was going through all of it, we had similar messaging a year ago as well that felt like we were right on the door of getting it. And what they do is they get you so excited about this next thing, they keep you, and they do incremental change. They'll say, you know what, we realize that this is the larger issue, we need this one small step from you, and if you do it, you're going to be really, really closer. And that's how they get more people to do it in general. So here's what the act of continually doing good is what we need to sustain all the time, right? So this is the best thing, right? So being exposed to things where we're constantly evolving our thinking and our education around an issue. And what's also fascinating about the actions is most of the social movement leaders coupled it with small one-word education pieces. And they did it very effectively, like One.org. One.org during the Super Bowl this year did an education campaign that was all done through digital advertising that said, do you realize today the stadium is using as much electricity as the country of Liberia will use this year? And that was it. And that brought them to a landing page, and on that page had them sign immediately that they wanted to fight it. And then what ended up happening from there, they had about 10 million people do that, and then it went from that 10 million to about 100,000 people that agreed to give money and do self-organizing, the owning part from there. So you can see how that progression happens very quickly from that. All right, so lastly before I finish, we'll do some questions because we're running into that time frame too. One is social movement leadership had these qualities. I'm going to talk to you about them all. One is almost every leader that developed a social movement was of the people, and they removed themselves. One of the biggest learnings that we had, they realized at some point the movement wasn't about them, it was about other people. And their vision didn't match with where everybody wanted to go, so they opted out. Almost all of them left. They didn't want to be the founders that stayed on. And, the second thing is almost all of them had incremental outcomes. Yeah, they want to basically give water to everybody in the world, or they want to solve some big issue for the city, but they realized early on the only way to do it is if people did small actions and felt that they were closer to it. They had small outcomes along the way. If you feel like we've got to try and get the message out of we're going to make cancer end tomorrow, it's great, but it's going to be a difficult message continually to maintain as they go forward. Ignoring technology. By the way, I gave a speech at South by Southwest, and I said that. That was an interesting discussion. And so almost all of them started telling the story first before they went to digital social media. You can't talk about things online until you're very effective talking about it person to person. And that was one of the best things that we learned from a lot of, even the most successful digital campaigns. If they couldn't tell the story person to person, it probably didn't work. And then the last one here, believers we talked about and making about others, is that they were always very authentic and provided the population with short vignettes that would say, this is who I am today and this is what we're dealing with. You can make that change. And we forget how much transparent relationships we need in the nonprofit field. As we've professionalized, we've kind of removed some of those people from our world because we say, well, the donor only cares about giving us money. Well, actually, the donor cares a lot about how the movement's working and what's happening. And they're entrenched in making it successful. And those organizations that hid that stuff or just don't talk about it tended not to get to movement status long term as well. So that's what we learned. Thanks.